Hello, my name is Adam Larrabee. I'm the head of the guitar department at James Madison University School of Music, and I'd like to talk today about jazz comping styles. Comping is the word that we use. It's a shorthand for accompaniment. So comes from accompanying, and it's basically rhythmic figures that we use when we're playing jazz. And I have listed a bunch of swing rhythms that are to be used on the blues chords that I talk about in the blues video, as well as an excerpt from Blue Bossa for Latin style, and an excerpt from the song Bluesette for jazz waltz style. So what I'll do is talk about these and then play them along with the metronome, which I'm going to slow down a little bit here. And the first one, I've included just the first and second chord from the B-flat blues, with the assumption that you can go through and finish using the blues chords from the blues video and finish an entire form of the blues. So to have these all fit on 2 pages, the B-flat 13 and E-flat 9 that you see are just the first 2 chords of a blues, but it's assumed that we'll continue the form. And the first trick here is anticipating. And anticipating means instead of playing 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, we're going to anticipate everything by an eighth note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 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 4, and 1. It's a really interesting thing, very syncopated, that instead of coming in on the downbeat like we would in a lot of rock and roll and classical music, strong downbeats, we're actually anticipating the downbeat by coming in the eighth note before. And this hooks up very interestingly with a walking bass line, which plays all the strong downbeats. Takes a while to get used to, but it's a really interesting figure to play. Very, very simple. Just anticipate everything by an eighth note. When there are 2 chords in a bar, instead of playing the second chord on beat 3, the halfway point, we're coming in the eighth note before it on the end of 2. Okay, these next series will all be the Charleston Rhythm. And the Charleston Rhythm is from a dance called the Charleston, a song that it emphasized the downbeat and the end of 2. And I believe the song was like 1, 2, 3, 4, bop, 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 ba da ba, bop, 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 bop. It's a kind of old 20s song. And that rhythm has been an important figure in jazz because of the grouping of 3 eighth notes syncopated, a grouping of 3 instead of a grouping of 2. And this syncopation adds a lot of color. So what we're going to do is play the Charleston, but displace it and move it along almost every eighth note in the measure. And I'll go through it first without the metronome, and then we can play through courses of the blues with the various displacements. Here's the regular Charleston rhythm. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now if I displace it, instead of beat 1 and the end of 2, it's the end of 1 and the downbeat of 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. It's a totally different feel, but the exact same thing moved over a little bit. So this really heightens our rhythmic awareness and gives us a lot of material to play when we're accompanying. Let's talk about articulation for a second. Some of these sound good long and some of them sound good short. Try it both ways. I have it written sustained as well as short in some cases with dotted notes as eighth notes. I think you could try long, short, short, long, both long, and see what best suits your style. So I'm going to put the metronome on and go through all of these. I'll do a full chorus, see if I can do it. Here's the Charleston. measure 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2. So I'll also point out I'm using my fingers. I find that the rhythmic clarity is a lot stronger and a lot more pianistic if I use my fingers. And since I play classical guitar as well, I grow my nails out a little bit to have a little bit more articulation. And I'm tucking my pick. Some people can do pick and fingers, and these are easy enough to strum as well. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. I gotta just be aware of muting, so I find that fingers are just a little easier for me. Use my thumb on the bass notes, and these fingers, or some people even hide the pick there, these fingers. Here's the displaced Charleston on the end of 1. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 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 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. Pretty cool feel. Here it is on beat 2. This is a popular rhythm that Lee Morgan did on his song The Sidewinder with a straight feel, but we're going to do it swung. The displaced Charleston starting on beat 2. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4, a 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 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 1. Cool. Where are we now? Displaced Charleston starting on the end of 2 and landing on beat 4. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 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 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 2, and 3, and 4. That was a little trickier. And you can mix these up eventually, but I think it's really important to go through them very, very systematically to internalize where these offbeats are. Starting in measure 11, this is the displaced Charleston starting on beat 3, and it's the same rhythm from So What? 1, 3, and 4, and 1. With a blues, it'd be 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4, a 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 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 3, and 4. Ended with some anticipations there. Something to be careful of. When you do this one, the second beat needs to be the chord in the next measure, since everything has been displaced so far along. Finally, the displaced Charleston starting on the end of 3, where our last note is the downbeat of the second measure. Here it is, measure 13, top of the second page of the handout. The displaced Charleston starting on the end of 3. 1, 2, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 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 3, and 4, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, So I hope you can see how helpful this is in terms of swing voicings and rhythms, to be able to use this Charleston as a way to figure out different parts of the measure. If you mix them up willy-nilly, sort of without thinking about them or without paying attention to the feel, it can sound a little schizophrenic. So I would recommend at first sticking to the same riff. And you might find that certain ones fit certain songs better than others. For a slight change here is the Latin or Bossanova. It's actually a samba rhythm from Blue Bossa. And I have the bass notes here written in as well. This kind of has to be played with the fingers or the pick and fingers in order to come through. And it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Couple things to point out here. Pay attention to the articulation. Some are short, some are long. This is also straight or even eighth time, not swung. You don't have to have your bass going alternating root and fifth, but it won't get in the way of the bass player as much as you think. If you listen to a lot of the Jobim with Stan Getz records or Joao Bosco, you'll hear that the bass notes of the guitar fit in pretty nicely. But do not syncopate them. They're on strong beats, 1 and 3. A lot of times people syncopate the bass notes, but the syncopation's in the top part of the chord, and the bass is very, very steady, 1 and 3. That's sort of important. Song for My Father would be another good one to try this with. When you have, it's a 2-measure figure. So notice in measure 20 and 21, when it goes from the D half diminished to the G7 flat 9 chord, that we anticipate the G7 on the end of 4. So if you have one chord for 2 measures, it works out perfectly. If you have a chord each measure, or 2 chords per measure, you'll have to anticipate the chord in the second measure by an eighth note. That's the part that went 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1. See, I went to the top of the G7 flat 13 chord before the bass note. Really great sound, and there are a lot of variations here. Listen to a lot of those players, and you'll hear that there's lots of different ways to play the particular figures, but this is a good one to start with. All right, finishing with the jazz waltz. I always think of the jazz waltz as Dave Brubeck's Take 5, but in 3/4. I feel like the beginning of that very, very common tune, Take 5, right, that sound, is, if you took off the last 2 beats, boom, boom, is the jazz waltz feel. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3. And if we've been paying attention, we'll notice that it's very similar to the Charleston in that you have a 3 eighth note figure. Boo bop, boo bop, boo bop, boo bop, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Almost like turning 3/4 into 6/8 with that syncopation in there. So here's the bluesette song in the jazz waltz feel, and I'm using just standard 3-note voicings like I talked about in the Freddie Green 3-note voicing page. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not using 3-note voicings. Those are 4-note voicings. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. That's the jazz waltz feel. Would work great with a lot of other common jazz waltzes like Someday My Prince Will Come or Up Jumped Spring. I hope you enjoyed this sort of adventure into jazz comping styles, and please refer to your handouts and contact me via the JMU Faculty Index website if you have any questions. Bye.